really happy to rise today to speak about superannuation. It's a subject that's dear to my heart as someone who started my own super fund when I was 19, and the Superannuation Objective Bill is pretty straightforward. I mean, a bill for an act relating to the objective of superannuation, and most people would already know that super, what it's for, and this bill, I think, really just sort of explains what's already in place. The reality is that super is there for people when they retire, and not everyone knows but a lot about what actually happens with their super. And some of the things that the former coalition government did have really made Australians aware of the options that they have around super. So the former coalition government delivered real reforms to superannuation that actually delivered for Australians. On this side of the House, we understand that superannuation is Australians' money. It's not the government's money, it's not the Prime Minister or the Treasurer's money, it's not the union's money, it's not the member for Kooyong's money, it's actually Australians' money. It's their money. And with $3.5 trillion super funds at the moment, it means the government has a tremendous responsibility to every Australian who invested in superannuation. I sometimes think that the government opposite, the current government, the Labor government, don't seem to understand that super is Australians' money. They might think that it's their money, that it's an opportunity there, those funds, for them to use. And I'll come back to that a bit more later. But the basic principle of superannuation is pretty simple, and I think it's important that we outline it here. Quite simply, superannuation is about providing for people, for Australians in their retirement. And we've heard some confliction there from the Treasurer as well, where he's mentioned that superannuation should be used for nation-building projects, often associated with industry super funds that are linked to unions, or to invest in social housing through industry super funds. Well, I'll say it again, the basic principles is that superannuation doesn't belong to the government or even the industry super fund or the retail fund that's managing it. It's up to Australians how they invest in their money. And for me, when I was 19, I had the fortunate opportunity where my dad said to me, "Luke, put away $80 a month. Salary sacrifice $80 a month into super." And at the time, I think I was earning about $290 a week or something, working in retail. I didn't really want to give up $80 a month. That filled my car up well and truly then. But over time, that just built, and I understood and learnt a little bit about salary sacrificing and watched that grow over time. And the company that I invested in was bought out by someone else, and then I ended up with some shares. And as a former Assistant Minister for Youth as well, I did learn that a lot of our younger Australians, particularly aged between 15 and 24, don't always have the financial literacy that that I was fortunate enough to be taught. And so I think rather than the government, advertising things, spending 40 or 400 million or whatever it is that they're spending on tax cuts, that they wouldn't be doing if the former coalition government hadn't legislated stage 3 tax cuts to start with. That money on advertising could be better spent on financial literacy, even programs like what we started, the First Home Super Saver scheme, that explains salary sacrificing and how people can get into a home that way as well. We've also seen that Labor have broken promises in relation, or the government have broken promises in relation to super. And we know that during a cost of living crisis, it's more important that we ensure our superannuation scheme remain focused on those people it's meant to bring security to, the Australian people. We had the Prime Minister promise before the last election that life would be easier under him, that life at cost of living would be reduced under him, that there would be no changes to superannuation under him. And now we see that the government has broken a number of promises time and time again in less than 2 years. And at the 2022 election, the Labor government claimed that they wanted to end the superannuation wars. That's what they said. And the Prime Minister and the Treasurer promised no changes to superannuation prior to the election. And then the Prime Minister promised no major changes in February 2023 after he was elected. So one thing before the election and one thing after. And so we know that they have introduced a new superannuation tax on unrealised capital gains that will affect the youth of today because whilst it's on balances over 3 million that kick in from July 1, 2025, it's not indexed. And so people that are 19 today, like one of my sons, in 40 years from now, I can tell you if it's not indexed, they will be hit with a tax that's double the rate as it is today in March 2024. It's currently taxed at 15%, and they're going to legislate it, or already have, to take it up to 30%. And so that's a real broken trust to the Australian people. And the government continually comes into this place and justifies it as to say, oh, it's only wealthy people, or it's only people that earn over a certain amount. And they continually pit Australians against each other. They did the same thing with the stage 3 tax cuts, where they promised not to change it, and they did that as well. So there were many policies that weren't taken to the election, or they said that they wouldn't change, which they now have done. And it's not good enough. The former coalition government understood that super funds' primary purpose was to make investment decisions that are in the best interests of members, and this was critical to our Your Super, Your Future reform package. And once again, the government has indicated that they're looking to make changes there as well, that they want to make changes to benefit the people that donate to them. That's what the Labor Party often does when they come into this place around legislation. They legislate for union donors. And we saw that through one of the first moves that this government made was to repeal the arrangement that we clearly set in place around Your Future, Your Super, that clearly states expenditure on items that are not supported by identifiable financial benefits to members, articulated in a clear business case, are unlikely to satisfy the requirements of the best financial interest duty. This move alone has allowed the unaccountable expenditure to run rife since the election of this government in less than 2 years. In the last financial year, 22-23, just 10 super funds made over $15 million in payments to unions. 10 super funds made over $15 million payments to unions, and over $21 million to the now-defunct industry Super Australia. The premise of this legislation is important to assure that the objective of super remains within the best interests of Australians, and the government can't be trusted when it comes to this. As I said before, I mentioned the First Home Super Saver scheme, which the members here in the chamber at the moment all voted against. And it was a pretty simple policy that actually did more to help young Australians and educate them on financial literacy than anything that this government has ever done. Because what it does is it taught thousands of Australians about the importance of salary sacrificing, where they're earning a wage, they might be on $80,000 a year, and at the time they were getting about 10%, another $8,000 a year in super. And what we legislated was that they could salary sacrifice more funds into their super and then withdraw it for their first house. And all these youth throughout Australia, and not just youth under 25, but some people in their 30s as well, had started the salary sacrifice into their super, and the government fought against it all the way and said they would repeal it, and I congratulate them on not doing that, because once again it's helped tens of thousands of people into their own home and taught them about salary sacrifice. So rather than paying 30% tax on their wage and ending up on a $10,000 contribution, $7,000 deposit because they lost $3,000 in tax, they do it into their super and are taxed at 15%, and on that $10,000 they're taxed at $1,500, and they end up with $8,500 as a deposit as opposed to $7,000. And that Australian is $1,500 better off with a higher deposit for their home. Now that's happening right now, legislated law of the land today. And the Coalition put that in place, along with a number of other policies to help Australians into their first home. So it won't surprise Australians if we take to the next election, which we will do, the opportunity for Australians to use a little bit of their super that they currently have in place to help them into their first home. And we're not making apologies for it, and this bill does nothing to stop it. And we will take that to the next election, and I can say to my Coalition colleagues in this place, we should continue to take it and explain it to elections. If we think it's the right thing to do, then we should continue to take it. And it's the same with energy and anything else. You know, the Treasurer often speaks about using superannuation and industry funds to invest in clean energy, but won't invest or even talk about nuclear power. In fact, today, he rubbished it today, when we know that if they're serious about climate change and want to meet net zero emissions, it's probably the only baseload power they can do. So what we get is hypocrisy from this government, because on one side they say, oh, well, you know, you can't do this with your super, but when it comes to industry funds, oh, that's okay. It's all right if the union donors do it that manage these industry funds. And it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And in the lead up to the next election, myself and others around the place will be out there talking to young Australians about their super, encouraging them to salary sacrifice. I believe in super. I want people to salary sacrifice. I want them to contribute over and above what their employer contribution is. But if it helps them get them into a home in the middle of a rental crisis and they want to use part of their super for that, they should be allowed. And the reality is that our policy that will take them to the next election will enable them to do that. And if they sell their home in 10 years and upgrade, well, that original deposit goes back into their superannuation, plus a share of the capital gain. So you can use super and industry funds to invest in social housing, or you can use super and industry funds to invest in community housing, but the Labor Party say that you can't use your own money to invest into your own house. Well, the Coalition, we will continue to talk to people, not just in my own seat of Petrie, and I have widespread support when I've spoken to people in my own electorate. In fact, I was at a polling booth for the Brisbane City Council elections just on Saturday, two days ago, and I was talking to a man about in his late 30s. He'd been through relationship breakdown. He was renting. He'd never owned a house before, and he's obviously doing the right thing, paying his ex-partner maintenance for their children and so forth, which is good. And when we spoke about superannuation and the opportunity to use a little bit of his super to get a deposit on his first house, he was excited about it because he had quite a bit in super. And he just can't save the deposit with everything else that he's doing with his growing family and in the middle of a cost of living crisis that we've seen under this Albanese Labor government, with 12 interest rate rises. It's pushed up mortgages, it's pushed up rents, that's pushed up electricity bills, that's pushed up food and everything else. And so when we get out there and explain it and talk to people, that's good. I mean, I don't know who the member for Kooyong's talking to when she comes into this place and says she's talking to people. Maybe people that are wealthy and own their own home and are voting for her. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of young people in this country that are excited about our policy. And in the lead up to the 2025 election, the Coalition will continue to talk to those people that need that help, that want to invest their own money into their own home. So I can say to the government and to everyone in this House, as the federal member for Petrie and those in my electorate, I believe in super. It's a good thing. It's a really good thing. We want to continue to talk, and every member in this House should talk about financial literacy, about salary sacrifice, promote the programs that the Coalition started and the Albanese Labor government are continuing. I've put it right on the front of my website, lukehowarth.com.au, the First Home Super Saver Scheme, the First Home Deposit Scheme, the Family Home Guarantee offering a 2% deposit for single parents to get into their own home. And that's important. We all have a responsibility to our constituents to want to see them get ahead. And we don't have a responsibility just to our donors for what they want or what our party always wants, but what is in the best interests of our constituents and to help them get ahead. And so if the Coalition believes in different policies, and I just say this to my colleagues, we should continue to fight for that. And, John Howard did that with, if you go back to the GST, it was defeated in 1993, and then they revisited it in 1996, and they took it to an election. Unlike this government, they took the GST to an election, won that election and then implemented that, and it's actually been a bonanza for the states, and it's actually been fairly good policy.